As the last leaf spiraled down from the maple tree outside, Hannah Whitaker realized she'd been cut out of her family's future. The glow of the chandelier bounced softly off the polished surface of the long walnut dining table, set with heirloom china and gold-rimmed glasses. A rosemary wreath rested at the center, as it always did during family celebrations, its earthy scent mingling with the clove-studded ham cooling on a sideboard. The room looked the same as it had for decades, but something in the air was different, something brittle. Hannah sat 3 chairs from the end, posture straight, fingers resting quietly on the linen napkin in her lap. Across the table, Morgan spoke with the accountant, her voice smooth, practiced. Ruth Whitaker sat proudly beside her eldest daughter, her silver curls pinned back in a style she hadn't changed in 20 years. Gordon, ever formal, had just cleared his throat to begin. "We appreciate everyone joining us tonight," he said, lifting his glass slightly in salute. 40 years is no small thing. Whitaker Herbal has stood the test of time, thanks to tradition, hard work, and a clear vision for the future. Hannah's fingers tightened around the napkin. "As many of you know," Gordon continued, "we've spent the past year reviewing succession plans. It's important to be clear and deliberate with legacy." Morgan leaned back in her chair, confident. Ruth looked fondly at her. "The new will," Gordon said, pausing, "has been finalized. All shares, intellectual property, and physical assets of Whitaker Herbal will transfer solely to Morgan." A ripple of polite applause passed around the table. A few guests clinked their glasses. Hannah's own stayed untouched. She wasn't surprised. She had suspected this would happen. But having the suspicion confirmed, spoken aloud in front of family friends and advisors, made her chest feel hollow. "We also wish Hannah well," Ruth added, her tone bright, her smile strained. "We hope this gives you the freedom to find what truly suits you." Freedom. Hannah swallowed the word like a dry seed. Morgan turned to her, expression somewhere between sympathy and self-satisfaction. "You've always marched to your own beat, hon. Maybe now's your chance to explore that." Hannah gave a tight smile, nodding once. Dinner continued, the roast ham was carved, the bread was passed, the wine flowed. Conversation shifted to market growth and Morgan's recent interview in a regional business magazine. Hannah remained mostly silent, answering when addressed, her voice even. In the hallway afterward, she paused before the family gallery, rows of framed photos dating back to the first herb stand her grandfather had run at a local farmer's market. Morgan was everywhere in the later years, on stage with ribbons, posing with customers, smiling with her parents. Hannah spotted herself once, small and slightly out of focus behind a holiday crowd. She left early. The wind outside tugged at her coat as she walked the few blocks to her apartment, a modest third-floor space above the old hardware store. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon and ink. She turned on the lamp beside her couch and sat down heavily, setting her purse on the coffee table. A crisp white envelope poked out from inside. No note. Just a check for $200, signed by her father. A farewell gift. Or maybe a quiet suggestion. She placed it beside her laptop and stared at it for a long while. She didn't cry. There had been too many years of knowing where she stood, this was only confirmation. She opened her laptop and clicked to the tab she'd left untouched for weeks, maybe months. The page refreshed, still active. Rustic cottage for rent, outskirts of Willow Creek. She closed her laptop, eyes resting on a tab she's left open for weeks, rustic cottage for rent, outskirts of Willow Creek. The cabin smelled of cedar and rain, and for the first time in years, Hannah felt free. The early light filtered through narrow-paned windows, casting soft gold across the floorboards. Outside, frost edged the porch railings like lace. The cedar walls of the cabin, long since weathered to a silvery sheen, exhaled warmth as the wood stove popped and crackled in the corner. Hannah stood in the small kitchen, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug. The silence was not empty, it was full. Full of bird calls in the distance, the gentle rustle of wind in pine needles, and the hum of something old awakening inside her. Her breath slowed. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding it for years. She unpacked the last box that morning. Most of its contents were books, old, cloth-bound volumes her grandmother had kept about wild herbs, foraging, and remedies of kindness, as she called them. One book flopped open naturally to a page marked by a faded photograph of her grandmother holding a bundle of dried lemon balm and smiling wide. "Kindness isn't loud," her grandmother once said. "But it lingers." She touched the edge of the photo and nodded to no one in particular. The kitchen shelves were already half filled with small glass jars she'd labeled in looping handwriting: lavender, nettle, dried orange peel. She gathered ingredients for the blend she'd been dreaming about since she first considered leaving her family's shadow, something calming, honest, and grounding. Something kind. Chamomile. Ashwagandha. A pinch of cinnamon bark. She crushed the herbs by hand, slowly, feeling their texture, letting the scent coat her palms. In silence, she filled muslin sachets and sealed them with wax paper folded into small envelopes. The act felt sacred. She placed the finished batch into a basket by the fireplace. Her branding materials were humble, hand-stamped craft paper, twine, and the name she'd finally written on a blank label: The Kind Cup. Mid-morning, she slipped on a thick cardigan and walked the half-mile into town, the basket swinging gently in the crook of her arm. Frost clung to mailbox flags and windshields. As she neared the town library, she noticed an elderly man on a bench, hunched slightly, a wool cap pulled low over his ears. His coat was tidy but worn, and his gloves had holes at the knuckles. He wasn't reading. He wasn't looking at his phone. He simply stared out toward the street, as if watching something long past. His stillness stopped her. She hesitated, then reached into her basket, pulling out one of the sachets and the small thermos she carried. Unscrewing the lid, she poured the amber liquid into a compostable cup and walked over. "Would you like something warm?" she asked softly. He turned to her, eyes sharp but not unkind. "What is it?" "Herbal tea," she said, holding out the cup. "Chamomile, mostly." He didn't smile. But he took the cup, wrapping his hands around it slowly, as though testing its weight. After a moment, he sipped. Steam rose. Silence lingered. "Tastes like someone remembers what peace is," he murmured, not looking at her. She offered a small smile and moved on without another word. That afternoon, she returned home and stacked firewood near the stove. The cold had crept in again, and the quiet was thicker now, like a blanket. She made herself a bowl of soup, lit a candle, and leaned back in the old armchair someone had left in the cabin years ago. She thought of the man on the bench. He hadn't asked her name. He hadn't offered thanks. But something in his voice stayed with her, a deep note of recognition. That night, sleep came easier than usual. The next morning, sunlight cracked across the porch in thin golden beams. Hannah opened the cabin door to fetch the newspaper and paused. Sitting on the top step was a small tin box, aged and dented, the color of old copper. She knelt slowly, lifting it with both hands. Inside were antique tea tins, each with delicate painted labels in faded cursive. Nestled on top was a folded piece of paper, thick and fibrous like handmade stationery. She opened it carefully. "Your kindness is seen. Alternative teas and tinctures?" "Sounds like snake oil," one woman muttered. Hannah didn't flinch. She kept arranging the small linen sachets on the edge of her wooden tray, pretending not to hear the remark. The Saturday market bustled around her, children chasing each other around barrels of apples, a guitarist singing folk songs near the fountain, and the scent of warm cinnamon drifting from a nearby pie stall. The square was dressed for autumn. Banners of burnt orange and maroon fluttered from the lampposts, and the vendors' tables overflowed with knitted scarves, jars of pumpkin butter, and polished wooden spoons. Hannah's setup, by contrast, was modest: one folding table, covered in a repurposed linen cloth, and a handmade sign: Solara Roots, herbal blends for calm, clarity, and care. Jenna arrived mid-morning with a friend in tow, a tall woman with bright lipstick and a skeptical expression. "We're just looking," Jenna said, though she lingered longer than that. She picked up a sachet labeled Clarity Blend and turned it over in her hand. "It smells nice," she said eventually, in a tone that almost passed for surprised. Her friend, meanwhile, sniffed a sample and raised an eyebrow. "What's root therapy?" Hannah smiled gently. "Just tea. With purpose." They moved on without buying anything. Hannah exhaled slowly and turned to refill the thermos of kind cup. She poured a sample for an older gentleman in a fishing vest who immediately wrinkled his nose and handed it back. She didn't take it personally. Not today. Back at the cabin, the antique tea tin still sat on the bookshelf above her desk, unopened, but always in her periphery. She'd started to wonder if it had come from Arthur, though she hadn't seen him again. The handwriting on the note was neat and deliberate, almost old-fashioned. Each time her resolve wavered, she glanced at it and continued. At the market, the flow of customers ebbed and swelled. Some smiled politely. Others ignored her altogether. Hannah kept her posture straight, answering questions when asked, accepting disinterest without resentment. Then, just past noon, an elderly woman with a cane stopped by. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a paper cup. "I'm not usually one for this kind of thing," she said, her voice husky. "But my daughter swears by chamomile and my joints are hollering today." Hannah offered the cup without a word. The woman took a slow sip. Her eyes didn't change much, but she nodded once before setting the cup down and walking on. A few minutes later, Hannah was wiping condensation off her thermos when she noticed the woman returning, this time with her daughter beside her. The daughter beamed. "She said her hands haven't felt that light in years," she whispered. "Can we buy a bag?" Hannah's smile was quiet but radiant. She handed over the sachet, carefully tied with twine. By mid-afternoon, she'd sold 5 more. Modest, but more than she expected. As the market began to wind down, Jenna returned alone. She stood for a moment, watching Hannah wipe down her table. "You held your own today," she said. "Still a long way to go," Hannah replied, glancing at the mostly empty basket. Jenna reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded $5 bill. She slid it into the tip jar without ceremony. "Maybe there's more to your roots than we thought." That night, Hannah sat in her cabin, the fire crackling low. The market had left her tired in a different way, worn down, but somehow filled up at the same time. She poured herself a cup of kind cup and leaned back in the armchair, letting the warmth soak into her hands. There was a knock at the door. When she opened it, no one was there. Just an envelope on the step, cream-colored and stiff. Inside was a single page. A formal notice: Morgan had filed a trademark challenge. Morgan's name wasn't on the envelope, but Hannah recognized her sister's cold precision in the cease and desist. The paper was cream, heavy-weighted, embossed with a firm's watermark. The letter inside was courteous, legal, and unmistakably strategic. Morgan hadn't signed it herself, of course, she never left fingerprints, but the wording was unmistakably hers. To protect the proprietary legacy of Whitaker Herbal, it read, "We must respectfully demand." Hannah laid the letter on her kitchen table beside the unopened tea tin. The rain outside tapped against the cabin roof like a slow metronome. She didn't move for a long while. The tea tin hadn't shifted since the day she received it. She'd left it there, almost as if afraid that opening it would change something intangible. The note inside still echoed in her mind. "Kindness is seen." But now, with Morgan's threat breathing down her neck, she wondered if kindness was enough to survive. She spent the afternoon walking to the courthouse, a modest red brick building tucked behind the town's post office. The clerk, an older man with thick glasses, directed her gently to a local legal aid contact. Caleb later confirmed he'd emailed her some names. "It might be nothing," he'd said, "but best be prepared." Word spread fast in a place like Willow Creek. By evening, her usual nods from neighbors had turned into hesitant glances. Jenna hadn't stopped by in 2 days. The little church group canceled their next tea Tuesday, without explanation. A booth space she'd reserved at the Thanksgiving artisan market was suddenly no longer available due to limited capacity. She took a long walk that night, her coat pulled tight against the wind. The square was already dressed for the holiday, wreaths made of cinnamon sticks and miniature gourds hung on storefronts, and the windows of Maple and Crumb Bakery glowed with warm light. But Hannah kept walking past it all, letting her thoughts drift. As she neared the library, she noticed a familiar shape sitting on the same bench as before. Arthur was hunched, a plastic poncho half draped over his shoulders, water pooling at his feet. His shoes were soaked through. "Arthur," she asked, startled by how thin his voice sounded when he replied. "Just resting," he murmured, though his hands trembled slightly on the cane. She didn't hesitate. "You're coming with me." He didn't argue. Back at the cabin, she helped him peel off his damp outer layers and wrapped him in a quilt from the sofa. The fire was still alive from earlier, and she stoked it until the flames danced again. She made a cup of kind cup and placed it into his hands without a word. He sipped slowly. "Too many people these days," he said softly, "talk about wellness like it's a trend. You treat it like it's trust." She sat across from him, arms folded, watching the steam curl. "I don't want to sell a product," she said. "I want to build a space where people feel whole. A place where health feels like home. Where tea isn't just something warm, it's something steady." Arthur didn't speak for a moment. His eyes, however, studied her with a quiet intensity. "I've seen ideas like that," he said. "They're rare. But when they grow, they change things." He finished his tea, then slowly pulled something from the inner pocket of his coat. A small card. Just his name, followed by a line of text. M. Leland, Glenmark Ventures. Hannah took it silently. Arthur stood, steadier now, and nodded once before stepping toward the door. He didn't say. She watched him disappear into the fading mist, then turned the card over in her hands. That night, as she sat down at her desk, her laptop chimed softly. An email. "We've been following your story. Let's talk." Hannah expected a cold investor in a suit. She got Arthur's son, and a cup of her own tea waiting on the table. The cafe in downtown Burlington was all dark wood and winter charm, with garlands already wrapped along the windows and cinnamon sticks tucked into napkin holders. Frost spidered the edges of the glass, and the hum of quiet jazz mingled with the hiss of the espresso machine. Hannah stood just inside the door, brushing the cold off her coat sleeves, unsure if she was in the right place, until she spotted it. A table near the back, set for two. A steaming cup of kind cup sat in front of the seat opposite a man in a gray wool coat, his hands folded calmly, watching her with an expression both curious and kind. "Ms. Whitaker?" he asked, rising slightly. She nodded. "You're Marcus." He gestured to the chair. "And you're exactly who my father said you were." As she sat, Hannah could feel the tea's warmth drifting toward her. She didn't touch it, not yet. "Arthur?" she asked softly. "My father," Marcus confirmed. "He's been quietly visiting small wellness makers around the country for the past 2 years. He wanted to find someone who led with empathy instead of ego." He reached into a sleek folder and pulled out a few photographs, grainy, intimate. Hannah offering tea to Arthur on the library bench. Hannah laughing with Jenna in front of her table at the market. Hannah hauling herbs in a basket slung over one shoulder, her boots muddy from the cabin trail. "He took these?" she asked, stunned. Marcus smiled. "He said it was rare to see someone do something kind with no audience. So he watched." She picked up the cup then, letting the familiar aroma ground her. "I don't pitch," she said after a pause. "I don't have charts or revenue projections." "I know," Marcus replied. "And yet, you've built something people believe in." He explained that Glenmark Ventures had recently launched a fund specifically for community-rooted wellness brands. "Most people think of scale," he said. "We think of soul." He slid a thin folder toward her. "We want to invest. A first round, enough to establish Solara roots with 3 permanent locations, starting here. But only if the core values stay intact. No rebranding. No mass production. And definitely no celebrity wellness influencers." She raised an eyebrow. "Yes," he added with a grin. That came up. She opened the folder and scanned the terms. Generous. Respectful. And at the bottom, a clause she hadn't expected. The kindness clause. It stated that Solara Root's founding mission, to create wellness spaces rooted in authenticity, community, and care, could not be altered without unanimous consent. It wasn't a legal gimmick. It was a safeguard. I want control over community programming, she said. And hiring. That part stays with me. Marcus nodded. That's what we hoped you'd ask. She signed. Not with trembling hands or dramatic music, but with quiet certainty. Her name inked on a page that didn't erase where she came from, it honored it. They spoke for another half hour, trading thoughts on expansion and how to keep soul in scale. As she rose to leave, Marcus handed her one last envelope. From my father, he said. He wanted you to have this, after today. Hannah slipped it into her coat pocket, heart full. She stepped outside into the late morning chill, snowflakes beginning to tease the air. Her phone buzzed. It was Caleb. Hey, he said. I thought you should know, Morgan just booked the town square. She's launching a Whitaker Heritage Tea Festival, same morning as your grand opening. 2 tea festivals. 1 town. One last chance to be heard, not just tasted. The frost had settled like powdered sugar across the cobblestones of Willow Creek's town square. Booths were lined in tidy rows, steam curling from every kettle, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon, clove, and roasted nuts. Families wandered through wrapped in wool and flannel, coffee in hand, children darting between tables clutching cider and mini pies. It was Thanksgiving morning, and though the town's annual festival usually featured one celebration, this year it had split in 2. On the south end of the square, Solara Roots had set up early. Hannah stood behind a simple wooden table, strung with hand-cut paper leaves and jars of dried herbs tied with ribbon. The banner above read, "Kindness you can taste." The first customers were already sipping from ceramic cups, speaking softly to one another as if the tea itself encouraged quiet conversation. On the opposite end, Morgan's booth was hard to miss, gleaming white canopies, digital menu boards, branded paper cups with metallic leaf prints. A sleek speaker played ambient music. Staff wore matching uniforms with the Whitaker herbal crest stitched in gold. Jenna arrived just before the choir's sound check. She adjusted the Solara Roots apron over her thick sweater and stepped behind the table with practiced ease. Need me to pour? She asked. Hannah smiled. You already are. The morning moved steadily. An elderly man who'd once asked Hannah if tea could fix a bad knee, returned with a folded chair and stories of how his wife was sleeping better. A woman shared that her daughter had started asking for the calming one with the little flowers. People didn't just buy, they stayed. At Morgan's booth, the flow was brisk, but few lingered. Customers took their cups and moved on. Some peeked at the ingredients list, frowned, and tossed the brochure into nearby bins. Morgan moved among her staff, poised, adjusting displays, occasionally glancing toward her sister's booth. Then, just before noon, the town manager climbed onto the small stage at the center of the square. The crowd hushed. He tapped the microphone once and smiled. We have a special guest today, he said. One of our own. From the crowd, Arthur stepped forward. Slowly. With a cane. The path cleared for him, people stepping back as he made his way to the mic. He wore a wool coat, a Solara Roots button pinned to the lapel. He cleared his throat once, then began. Some months ago, I was cold, tired, and invisible. I sat on a bench not expecting anything, and someone offered me a cup of warmth without asking who I was or what I could give in return. He paused, letting silence settle. That cup, he said, wasn't just tea. It was trust. And it reminded me that true healing, whether physical or emotional, starts not with a formula, but with care. The breeze carried his words gently across the square. He turned, lifting a hand toward Hannah's booth. Solara Roots is what happens when someone builds a business not from ambition, but from empathy. And that's something this world, and this town, needs more of. Applause rippled across the crowd. Then grew. Morgan's smile stayed frozen, but her posture shifted. She stepped forward as if to reclaim the moment, thanking everyone for coming and launching into a prepared speech about heritage and honoring tradition. But her voice cracked. And the microphone fizzed out. It didn't matter. The crowd was already drifting, cups in hand, toward Solara Roots. Hannah didn't gloat. She simply kept pouring tea. The festival wound down slowly. Kids curled up in laps. The choir sang soft carols as the sun dipped lower. Vendors began to pack up. As Hannah wiped down the table, Morgan approached, her gloves still perfectly matched to her coat. She stood for a long moment before speaking. "Would you ever let me start over?" On a cold morning filled with steam and spice, one quiet cup of tea reminded a whole town what warmth truly meant. In the hush between celebration and competition, it was empathy, not elegance, that people remembered and returned to. Sometimes, what begins with a small act of kindness becomes the root of something far greater than we ever intended. When we stop judging by appearance and start listening with the heart, we open space for healing to grow. And maybe, just maybe, the gentlest stories are the ones that linger the longest.